This episode of Beyond the Tube is proudly sponsored by Blended Tube Feeding. Blended Tube Feeding was created by dietitian Hilarie to support families who want to nourish their tubie with real food. Built on proven, research-backed methods, the platform empowers parents and caregivers to feel confident about safely and effectively using blended diets. Want more hands-on support? Check out Blended Tube Feeding Made Simple, an online community overflowing with delicious, nutritionally balanced recipes designed specifically for tubies. You'll also get step-by-step videos, expert resources, and a private community where families can connect and learn together. As a Beyond the Tube listener, you'll receive 25% off your monthly subscription with my exclusive affiliate link, which you'll find in today's show notes. Now let's dive into today's episode. Welcome back to Beyond the Tube. In today's episode, we're joined with Hilarie, dietitian and owner of Blended Tube Feeding. She is going to share with us a whole wealth of information about making the jump to blended tube feeds and what it's really like to start blending your own feeds for your tubie and also using a combination of blends and formula feeds. Let's jump into the episode. Hilarie, why do you advocate for blended feeds and why has this become such a big passion of yours?
I hate to say I fell into it, but I sort of did. I didn't think as a dietitian this would be what I was going to end up doing. When I first became a dietitian, I didn't even know that this was a thing. It can be a long story, but the short answer is I worked with a lot of families who were doing this and seeing amazing results. I worked in a very busy clinic and it was just a lot of defeated parents who felt like they were on this hamster wheel of symptom management and totally defeated, and I like to cook and I like to garden and I'm a big foodie, I guess you could say. I had these families that were kind of doing this on their own. We weren't anti-blends by any means, but we just kind of we had our stuff. Here's your formulas you can use. Here's your medications. If you want to blend, you kind of have to figure that out on your own. I had families that were doing it and seeing amazing results, and not just from a digestive perspective, the kids were feeling so much better, but they were enjoying it. They were like, I love cooking for my child. I feel like a parent again. It's just so cool to be able to share Thanksgiving dinner with my child. And from there, I was like, kids are feeling better and parents are enjoying this. And if I had a child with a feeding tube, this is what I would want to do. Sort of to snowball from there, and didn't really enjoy my hospital job. So I just started to practice with this stuff and slowly kept helping more and more families. And, the rest is kind of history from there.
That is amazing. I wish there were more dietitians like you. I think it's amazing that you could see beyond, I guess, what is generally prescribed and set out as normal and giving formula and that kind of thing. I know for us in our journey with Ezra, that's exactly how it started. Here's some formula, try it. Everything made him sick. Everything made him horrendously vomit. And we were not gaining any traction. The reason he had the tube was for failure to thrive. And he was not thriving. He was getting worse because he was so sick. He had an NG tube for 16 months. And for 16 months, we had no choice. They won't let you put anything through other than milk or formula types of things. He was on Neocate and it stinks and it's not great for the stomach. And he was so sick. Once we finally got to move to a Mickey button, which changed our lives, we very quickly decided that we wanted to look into blended tube feeding. And honestly, I haven't looked back. I do a combination of blending myself, and I also use the prepackaged blends that are available.
I don't know very many who don't, because I always think the families, I don't know anybody who eats by mouth that cooks all their food. It's impossible to keep up with, I think it's pretty cool that we have so many products now. I still have families too that will use standard formula and blend, and their child does much better with a combination of things. I always want to point to it's, I'm no way is it anti-formula. I think whatever works best for families is the most important, but I just don't think people, even though this is an option, or are just told that it's unsafe. And, I'm sure we'll get into that too.
I think that's definitely a big thing that we hear a lot here in Australia, and I'm sure it's probably a systemic issue worldwide, is that it's safer and easier to use a formula because it's easier to calorie control, it's easier to control volume, it's easier to understand if child does not accept that's the only thing it could be. Whereas with a blend, it's obviously more difficult to ascertain calories. Obviously, if they have some kind of reaction to it or if they're unwell, you have to work out what was it inside of that blend that made them unwell. So yes, there is another degree of, I guess, of difficulty or complexities is maybe a better word. But I think for Ezra in particular, having a normal feeding regime has been better for not just his health, but for his physical ability to do things. Whilst formula is fantastic, I just still think that there's deficits in it. There are
Yeah.
things missing out of it that you get from whole food, and you can only get that when you blend.
Right. Yeah, I mean, formula is made to the standard stuff is it's pre-made, shelf stable, it's designed to meet nutrient needs, but I think it's the nutrient needs to just I don't want to say survive, but just, to be able to not have a deficiency and just get the bare minimum of things, but it doesn't have the prebiotics and the probiotics and all that stuff that really our gut likes. There's just so much more flexibility with blending too that makes a big difference.
Definitely. You can include them in your meal. Whatever you're having, you can just blend that. And maybe you don't do it that day. Maybe it's the next meal that, you've had spaghetti bolognese tonight, so you keep
Mhm.
a bowl aside and then you blend that up in the morning ready for dinner or lunch the next day. So you're not actually adding to your workload. You can still do the same thing. Or you might add some extra stuff in. You might add some extra protein in, or you might add some extra veggies in. Obviously, you've got to thin it down, but ultimately, your tubie can eat what you eat, which I think it's pretty special.
I mean, it's really just real food going into the body a little different. There definitely is more work up front, but that's with anything that you try. And I find from most families I talk to, the work up front or the benefits that they get later is way worth it. All the time you get back when your kid's not puking anymore, and maybe you're not on lung pump feeds anymore, and you're not calling the doctor as much, not as many medications. There is that period where it's a little bit you are juggling a little bit more while you're trying to figure things out. But I think if you have the end in sight, life can get easier in a way when you find the plan that actually works for you and your family.
I agree. I would love to ask you, for those that have got a dietitian on board who is pro formula or pro easy calorie count, how would you advise that they broach the subject of blending with their dietitian?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is a dietitian that's pushing back a little bit, and so
Yeah.
sure. I think what I would encourage families to do is try to understand their resistance and why they're having concern with it, because so often dietitians and clinicians are misinformed or just haven't gotten the proper training. It's like these sound bites that they've heard. Oh, it's not safe, you clog your feeding tube, you can't meet nutrient needs, but really none of that is actually supported in literature. There's literature that's showing that that's not the case. How we have to be evidence based. So if you can show them pieces of something that is, debunking what they're saying, I think that can be super helpful. If they're worried about nutrient needs, that's something too where I just like them to like kind of rephrase the way they're thinking about it. Because if it's, again, it's just food going to the body differently. And so if they're helping somebody else who eats by mouth meet their nutrient needs, like, can't it just be the same? Can you just do the exact same approach that you would with that person? I know with formula, it's really nice because we can know exactly what the person's getting. And you do get the same thing pretty much every day, every meal with formula. It needs to be nutritionally complete. Like, we can't be missing vitamin D because that would be a problem. But that's not how people eat. And the flexibility of real food allows you to eat like on anybody else. I think the big thing is just trying to understand what points do they feel are the most worrisome, and then find resources that teach them otherwise. I actually have a free article on this too. It really is just not unsafe, and it's not that hard to get it right. This isn't rocket science. It's just food going into the body a little differently. I think it's just, addressing some of that in that way.
Definitely. I have a very open minded dietitian, which is amazing. But her first go to is always, we can put him on XYZ formula.
Hmm.
I think obviously it's easy because
it's very controlled. When I say to her, "That's great, I'm happy to do that, but could we look at an alternative with blends? What does that look like?" I'm happy to go and look for recipes. I'm happy to come up with it myself or tell her how much of each thing I'm planning to put in or what I have been doing. Then she works out the calories and then she'll say to me, "Oh, you need to put a little bit more of this in because it's a bit short here, or add a scoop of this in because that will give you a bit of this," or whatever it might be. I'm quite lucky, but I do know of families who are not in the same position and they have had resistance. That's really valuable feedback of discussing it and advocating for what you want for your child without sort of pushing something onto someone that you obviously respect and trust.
Sometimes I wonder too, I think it's so easy to not put yourself in your patient's shoes. You just kind of get like you have so many patients, you're just getting through them. You want to be safe, you don't want to prescribe something that's wrong or going to be harmful. But I've had some people tell me that they say, well, they ask the dietitian or the doctor, well, what would you do? Like if you had a feeding tube or you had a child with a feeding tube, would you want to have the same protein shake every day for the rest of your life? Would you want your child to not be included in any family meal? And sometimes you have to obviously have to feel comfortable doing that. I think there's probably situations where that would feel super uncomfortable, especially, depending on who you're talking to. Just thinking that way too, just like taking them out of the situation and just saying like, hey, what would you want to do? And it's probably going to be a learning curve for both sides. But again, once you just start doing it and practice, and if you can make sure that someone who eats by mouth is getting the right nutrition, you can do it with someone with a feeding tube.
Yes. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Am doing it. And yeah, look, there are some days where it feels harder than others. There are some weeks where it feels, like, oh, just can't make it
Mhm.
happen this week. But I feel like that's where we're lucky, where we've got, these prepackaged blended food alternatives, which you can just go to the cupboard and they can still have their blend and the calories that are in them and you can supplement or add if you need to, but they're there, and it's very easy when you're traveling. We've recently traveled. We went to Singapore over the Christmas New Year period, and then we went to Hawaii in April. And honestly, so easy traveling with pre-packaged blends. I suspect easier to travel with those than it would be if I had a giant tin of formula with me. It was so easy. I went through customs in Sydney twice and customs in Singapore, customs in Hawaii. It was so, so easy. I would be interested to know what other families have experienced with traveling with formula versus blends, but I can definitely advocate that the blend was very easy to travel with.
Yeah.
And how good is that?
Yeah, right, and even probably easier than feeding a kid who's eating by mouth at times,
Yes,
right? Like, you have to try to find what to eat, and then they don't wanna eat it, and, in that way, it can be easier
absolutely.
too.
Definitely. When you start blending and you start looking at those options, then you kind of open your eyes and go, hang on, if I was in a different part of my country or I was in a different part of the world and I'm traveling somewhere and I need to feed my tubie, if they're already introduced to blended feeds, you can walk into any supermarket, you can buy something like a baby food that's already blended, it's nice and thin. You can get creative, you can make stuff. So it takes some of that pressure and stress off families when they're not at home. They can just sort it out rather than going, "Oh, I've got to have this specific formula. This child can
Mhm.
only have this." And in some cases, of course, that is the way it is, and that's okay too. But when you start going down the rabbit hole, you realize that this actually makes life easier.
From Yeah, it's definitely the beginning is very stressful and overwhelming, just even thinking about it, but I find that for many families too, once they just get going and take that first step, they're like, "Okay, I can do this." And it's helpful to have resources and support, of course, too,
Course.
when you're trying to do this on your own, that makes it a lot harder.
Definitely. When people are getting started, we all know that for our tubies, calories are very important, and usually the highest priority for people is making sure they're getting enough calories into their child or into their tubie. How do people work that out?
I think it depends on the situation because I have some families who feel comfortable just making a plate and like they would for their other child and then blending that with some liquid and then, making adjustments with their dietitian from there. When you go from a very calorie controlled formula that you know exactly the calories and how much you're getting, that can be very scary. I have a process I take families through, and I can sort of walk you through that because I think it will be helpful to have some examples. But either way, really suggest families, no matter what, just start slow and don't stress too much about the calories in the beginning when you're testing things out. If you are just doing 15 to 30 mLs, a tablespoon or two of a puree, maybe if it's a store-bought puree, mix it into the formula or breast milk. Do that once a day for a couple days, try new food. Don't worry about the calories at that point. You are giving so much formula still. Stage is really just like testing things out, seeing what your child can tolerate, and also showing you that nothing bad's going to happen because you put something else through the tube other than formula and breast milk. And sometimes you just need that step to feel like, okay, I put something else through the tube. And then from there, maybe mixing a few of those foods together and you're still doing a majority of formula, but you're just kind of getting your feet wet. What I do with families who are concerned about calories is we have a large database of recipes that have the same calorie level as formula. For example, if you're on a formula that's 1 calorie per ml, if you have blend recipes that are also 1 calorie per ml, then you can swap, one meal for the other and keep calorie intake the same. That's the way we made it really easy for families is just start with little purees and then maybe practice blending at your own foods. We have simple recipes that have a few ingredients that most people have on hand just to help them get comfortable with the blending process. Then just take it one meal at a time. Even at that point, maybe you don't have recipes necessarily. I mean, you can find recipes all over. So you don't necessarily have to have these robust recipes, right? You're just starting with one meal. Keep everything else the same formula wise and just practice with lunch. Maybe lunch is an easy time to make a plate of food. Maybe you do follow a recipe just for some peace of mind and you start with lunch and you do that for a week or two. I think the tendency is to either one, be really excited about it and just take on too much too soon. And then you're overwhelmed, then you don't do anything at all versus just knowing what you have capacity for. The other thing too, and of course, if your child's not doing well, you want to get them on a different thing quickly. That sometimes can backfire too, because if your child hasn't had any food or fiber before, their gut's not used to it. You can end up with a little bit more trouble if you go too fast. Just taking it slow. I do think recipes can be really helpful when you are getting started because if I'm going to make the bolognese, I'm not going to just whip that up in the kitchen. I follow a recipe. Give yourself some grace that you don't have to know this. You don't have to come up with this perfect plan. Just take things slow. And when you're testing things out, I wouldn't stress as much as maybe you feel like you have to, which is very easy for me to say. I know if I was in the same situation, I probably would be more stressed than what I'm letting on to.
I think I fall into the category of taking on too much too soon. I tend to be the kind of gung-ho person and throw everything into it. But then I was like, oh, this is all too much. It's too hard. I have to do this too often. It's too complex. I can't do it. And then I was like, hang on. How complex is it versus how complex are you making it?
Yeah.
It was definitely the latter. I was making it difficult. I think once I started to strip it back, and now I don't need a recipe. It's all stored in my head. I know how much I need, how much MCT oil I need. I know how much peanut butter to put in. I know what fruit to put in. I know how many oats I need to have in, I know all of that now. And I'm probably a little bit more fluid with relaxing on, that's about a cup. That'll be fine. It's definitely at a point for me now where I've loosened up and become more relaxed, but definitely at the beginning, I went too hard, too fast, and it did feel very overwhelming. So I definitely reiterate that point, which is maybe just start with one meal a day and start slow because it can feel like all you're ever doing is blending foods.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, to kind of think about your capacity. I don't actually know many who blend every day. Most people are blending every few days, once a week, once every other week, just getting a good stash for their fridge or freezer so that they're not doing this every day. So don't take it all on. And then, there's just there's so many other things that you have to do with care. It's just a lot. So, give yourself some grace. And even too, you could start, if you're doing regular formula, maybe you start with one of the commercial real food products. You're not doing the blending, you're just getting started with some real food. And that can be a good stepping stone just to even see if it helps your child feel better or, maybe you enjoy it more doing the packaged foods like that instead too.
Definitely. I think that's a really good segue into storage. And I feel
Yeah.
like this is a super hot topic is safe storage. How are people supposed to store their blends?
I feel like there's just so much more pressure and concern put on people with a feeding tube than the rest of us who eat. It's very important to be safe, but I don't want the fear of that you're going to totally harm your child very easily get in the way. It's pretty easy just to take normal safe food handling practices and it's going to be fine. So
Mhm.
make sure your surfaces are clean and wash things and don't mix raw chicken with raw produce. I would say the biggest things is you just want to make sure that your storage containers are airtight and sealable, but you probably have something on hand like a mason jar or a deli container. If you're just getting started, it can be really easy to want to buy everything and just get a bunch of stuff, but you don't really know how this is going to go until you just get started. You probably have an airtight sealable container at home, so just start with that. But as far as, how to keep that food safe, this is real food, so it can't be out on the counter for a long time. And maybe tube feeds take a little bit longer than a meal might take. So just keeping that in mind. If you take it out of the fridge, it really needs to be used within 2 hours of being out of the fridge. As far as like how long to keep it in the fridge, that's a hot topic too. Like really you can think of this as leftovers, and new guidelines for dietitians, at least in the States, say to just treat it like leftovers, 3 to 4 days in the fridge. And then the freezer, really, it doesn't go bad or spoil, but it's going to lose quality over time. Fridge, 3 to 4 days. Freezer is 1 to 3 months for optimal quality. Not a lot of people are making up to 4 months of food. Usually that's not a problem unless one gets, lost in the freezer. I mean, that's kind of the basic overview of safe storage. I think the only other things to maybe keep an eye on is if you are doing a blend through a pump and it takes longer than 2 hours, you might be told that you're not supposed to do that, but there are ways to keep it safe. You can
Definitely.
use these little packs you can get on Etsy to put on a feeding bag. You can put ice packs on either side to keep it cold.
Yep.
So what bothers me is people say that's not safe, but then they're taking their food to work in a lunchbox. If you can eat
Yep.
your lunch, why can't this person have food too? I think there's just always this concern, and you just think outside the box a little bit. There's ways to get this done and do it safely.
Definitely. And we send our children to school with a lunchbox. There's probably a yogurt in there or a
Yeah.
cheese sandwich or, something in there that should not be out of the fridge for more than 1 hour. And they're not eating it till, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and we packed it at 7 o'clock in the morning. What's the difference? And for us here, in Australia, it's very hot. We do get very hot summers, but our homes are also air conditioned. The environment that these feeds are in are cool. Even the kids who have their little backpacks on with their pumps, they're generally inside a cool environment. It's not like they're sitting out in the blazing sun. If that's happening, there's probably more to discuss than their food spoiling inside the tube. I know Tubie Fun have plenty of different
Best. The best.
things that you can get and hang and all kinds of cool stuff that you can get to keep your blends cool and
Yeah.
safe.
Yes. And of course, we want to be like, especially kids who are immunocompromised, or maybe if they did get sick, it would be a lot tougher on them than others. We do want to make sure it's staying cool, but an ice pack is the answer. It's not that hard to do that. I do have families that like to warm their meals after storing them because it is helpful. Cold food tends to be thicker, so that can be tough for small feeding tubes and our small, narrow extension tubes in general. So warming it can be helpful. I find that warming helps a lot of the kids that I work with feel better. I don't know if you noticed that with Ezra. That's one thing to
Never
think.
actually warmed anything, to be
Yeah.
honest. I don't think I've ever warmed to. Sometimes what I'll do is bring it out of the fridge. I'll draw the syringes
Yep.
and then I'll leave the syringes out of the sun, but on the bench maybe for 20 minutes just to bring it to room
Yeah.
temperature rather than it being freezing cold from the fridge, which is something I would do with my own food. It's not different to anything I would do normally. I could imagine it wouldn't be a nice feeling if I was pushing something really cold into his tummy.
You don't want to overwarm it either. That's very important to just make sure, room temperature or slightly above or below is probably all that's needed. I have some adult friends that have a feeding tube and they tell me too warm actually makes them nauseous. There's a sweet spot, but I like the idea of just taking it out, letting the chill come off for 20 minutes when I leave a blend on the counter that I'm experimenting with. It gets pretty thin pretty quick just being on the counter for 20 minutes. That's an easy way to do it because otherwise you're doing a bottle warmer or a warm water bath, and that's another step. That's a lot to add in.
Definitely, definitely. What would your advice be for parents who are interested? They're buying in. I can see there's value to this. I can see the positives, but they're tentative to take the next step. Is there literature that they can read? Your website and your Instagram page are fantastic resources.
Yeah, there's a lot of information out there. There's a helpful book that a lot of people use, the Homemade Blended Formula Handbook. People like to read that. One has a lot of information in there. There's people who have blog posts that give some information. I am happy to share articles that people could read that are, research based and provide help that way. I also think it's helpful to talk to families who are doing this. I learn the most from the people who are doing it. Yes, I can read these long articles, but when you just get this is the way you're supposed to do it, it doesn't always equate to practicality. I think connecting with people who are doing this, whether that's in Facebook groups, if you are working with a dietitian, connect with someone else doing it in your area.
Mhm.
I honestly think that you're going to feel the most encouraged talking to a parent who's done this and just tells you that it's okay and you're going to be okay and it's not as hard as people make it seem.
Yes, I agree. And people can definitely comment on Spotify and Apple Podcasts on this episode. So if you do have questions, if there are things that you want to know more about, ask us.
Yeah.
We can answer those questions or point you in the right direction as well, which would be helpful to people, I would imagine.
There's a lot of Facebook groups that have communities with people who are doing tube feeding and blending, a community that people are welcome to check out and try to.
I think we should definitely talk about signing up to your emails because that for me is a really good prompt. Like, I think that would be a really good resource for people.
I try to keep it short, 5 minute or less read because I know you just don't have as much time as you want. And honestly, once you start reading something long, I'm like, it's in and out. You got to just get the main points across. Something that comes up often is people hear this is good and this is so beneficial, but they might not understand exactly why it's helped so many kids.
What are the health benefits of doing blends and blending at home or using prepackaged blends as it may start with? Why should people consider it if they're not
Yeah.
yet?
Yeah, I find that a lot of people are told, "This is so cool, you should do it." You don't really understand the reason behind it. Honestly, dietitians too. I think if more dietitians understood the benefits, they'd be more likely to talk about this with families. I think a few things that come up when I think about this is with real food, and we talked about this a little bit, but with real food, you're just going to get more than you're going to get from your formula. You're going to get the prebiotics, probiotics, all this stuff that's really important for our gut health. And we know gut health plays into so much of the rest of our body and how things function. I also find that real food, the variety is super helpful. Not necessarily that you have to have the most well rounded diet, but when you get the same thing, no matter how healthy it is, let's say you got even if it was a real food smoothie and it was the same thing every single day, it's just not gonna sit as well over time. You're just gonna after a while be lethargic. You're just gonna feel like you want something different. I think that's the same thing when you get formula over and over and over again. Your body just wants something different, and getting that variety fuels you with the things that you need. Another kind of fun one I think that's interesting is real food tends to be a thicker puree going through the feeding tube than thin formula. So many kids I work with, just having something thicker has made a world of a difference for their digestion. It just sits heavier. It's not coming up as quickly. These kids who have been puking their whole life, they're pretty good at it. They're pretty good at bringing up food. If it's a little bit thicker, it sits heavier. It also just moves through the body more naturally than thin formula. Those are the reasons I see kids do so much better is just the variety, the things in there that we're not getting from formula, and simply just being thicker, which again, you can find a lot of thicker commercial products. That's an easy switch. If your child's dealing with a lot of reflux and vomiting, switching to one of the thicker commercial products, or even just adding a little puree to your formula can make a big difference and help them keep it down.
I agree completely. I know definitely for Ezra and people on the tube feeding community forums and Facebook that having children who are vomiting a lot from formula feeds. I know with Ezra, he would build up a tolerance to the formula. He would be okay for maybe 3 weeks, and then the vomiting would just nonstop. Like it would just be nonstop. Every feed, that nothing was staying down. It was like we have to just stop and go back to just giving him water. In my head, I picked the stomach and that it's building this lining of just formula. It's just building this like sediment. Whereas with, like you say, real food, it does sit heavier. I also think that the body is designed to naturally break down. It's not synthetic. formula is synthetic. It's
Yeah.
man-made. It's not natural. It's not like you're putting an apple or a pear or an orange or a banana. They're natural foods. This is not natural. There's no other way to look at it. It's not dissing it in any way, but it's still not natural. It's synthetic. So they're not designed to just keep having them over and over and over and over again. And I truly, truly believe that this is why, in Ezra's case, he was so sick, because since we've changed to a blend, he is not sick. In himself, he's so much happier. So much happier. He doesn't get so cranky. It's not so lethargic. It's not just about a physical change to his diet. It's completely changed his behavior. It's completely changed his energy levels. I'm such a strong advocate for it, because I truly think if people could just try it, they would see the difference.
Yeah, definitely. And even when you were talking to there, like about being sick, and it's like when you have to give the same thing over and over again when you're sick, that's not great either. When I'm sick, I don't want a heavy product or a steak dinner, but having that flexibility to, when your child's not feeling well, give toast or
Yeah.
soup, and then, going back to formula or blends after that. That's another reason people see benefits, is you have the flexibility to whatever's going on in that day or that week, or it's cold and flu season. You can give these amazing immune boosting blends with vitamin C and ginger and all of this stuff to prevent illness. Get that option with formula. It's just another reason that it helps our children just be happier, healthier, and just be able to thrive.
I agree. And I cannot thank you enough for being such an advocate in this space. I feel so blessed to be able to have had this conversation with you. And I love getting your emails, and I love checking your page and your Instagram page. We'll hook up all the links and everything in our show notes so people can find you and find more information, because I really think if you just start looking, do a bit of research, and just dip your toe in, you're going to love it. It's going to change your world, and it's going to change your tubie, whoever that is. It could be an adult. It doesn't have to be a kid. I'm positive that your friends who are adults who have gone from formulas to real food, that the difference, like, they can verbalize it. They could tell you.
Definitely. That's what's hard, right? When you have a child who is not verbal or not speaking or is young and they can't tell you, it's so hard. I'm a very empathetic person, and I have tried to put myself in my family's shoes, and I still can't. But now having a child, it makes this work even more important to me, to just help these kids feel better, because my heart breaks when they're not feeling good.
We need more dietitians who are open-minded and willing to try something that's outside of what we say is normal. We try not to use that word in this space, but in this instance, I think it's warranted. There's still a lot of work to be done in acceptance around blends, and taking blends to school and preschool and daycare and that kind of thing, and educating people on why we choose this option over formula or in conjunction with. But we're taking some strides, and I can see the difference. Ezra's be 4 in November, and he's had a tube in some way, shape, or form every day of his life since he turned 1. Literally 3 days after he turned 1, we were put in hospital and the NG tube went in. In that short period of time, the difference in blends and the acceptance and the marketability, the availability of pre-made blends, all of those kinds of things has definitely expanded, which is phenomenal. It's wonderful.
Yeah. So important, so needed. I'm hopeful for the future. Everything is always slow, but I'm seeing that too.
Yeah, which is great. Thank you so much, Hilarie. I have just loved our chat.
I love what you're doing. I mean, every time I see a tube feeding podcast come up, I am so excited, but I've especially loved yours. You're a natural on the
Thank
mic,
you.
and I feel like you have really great people, and it's been so educational and also just fun to listen to. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I live the experience, and if I can just help one person take the step to doing blends, that would just make me so happy. I hope someday someone comments on our podcast and says, hey, I actually tried blends and I've never looked back. That will just make my day.
Yeah, I would love that. That's so cool.
This episode of Beyond the Tube is proudly sponsored by Blended Tube Feeding. Blended Tube Feeding was created by dietitian Hilarie to support families who want to nourish their tubie with real food. Built on proven, research-backed methods, the platform empowers parents and caregivers to feel confident about safely and effectively using blended diets. Want more hands-on support? Check out Blended Tube Feeding Made Simple, an online community overflowing with delicious, nutritionally balanced recipes designed specifically for tubies. You'll also get step-by-step videos, expert resources, and a private community where families can connect and learn together. As a Beyond the Tube listener, you'll receive 25% off your monthly subscription with my exclusive affiliate link, which you'll find in today's show notes.
Thank you so much to Hilarie for joining us today on Beyond the Tube. I really hope you got something out of it and you might be willing to try some blended feeds in the near future. Until the next one, stay safe and we'll see you soon.